Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Helen Fallon, and I'm the Deputy Librarian here at Maynooth University. I'm delighted to welcome you to our Love Data Week event. And we're very pleased to have Lorainne Estelle, who's the co-editor of Insights, the UKSG journal, with us to share her insights into publishing in an academic journal today. And over the past 5 years or so, myself and other colleagues here in Maynooth University Library have actually published in Insights. And I just really want to say we've had tremendously positive experiences, and dealing with Lorraine in Insights has really been a pleasure. And it's great to see our work in an open access peer-reviewed journal. So we really appreciate that. Now, library staff have lots of access to lots of data, and this is Love Data Week. So I was just going to start by asking people if you want to pop into the chat box any data that you or your library create, and we might just have a look at that. My colleague Heidi will call out whatever is put in the chat box. So have a think about that. And the chat box is on my screen, it's on the lower part of the screen. And if you just click on that and just type in any type of data you can think of that your organization creates, that will be a little bit of fun for us to warm up and start thinking about, because we're actually surrounded by data, but sometimes we don't think about it. Now, throughout the session, Heidi will be monitoring the chat box, and she will periodically, I'll go over to Heidi for questions, okay? So people, if you put in, as I say, any type of data you can think of that your organization generates, if you pop that into the chat box. And Heidi, do you want to call out anything that's there?
Welcome, Catherine. CIR stats, e-resources stats, survey results. Laura Musto has performance data, survey results, qualitative and quantitative. Then from Fiona, we have some usage statistics, number of queries, footfall, number of training sessions, loans, returns, renewals. Jane Bugle also has resource usage stats. That seems to be it for now, but plenty of options. Oh, and Alexandra has classes and training queries and conservation, of course.
Great. There's lots there, and I'm sure Lorraine will agree with me that much of that data could be used in articles for Insights. And perhaps with that, I'll start off by asking Lorraine to tell us a little bit about the journal. I did circulate on Twitter the link to the journal earlier, but if you want to tell us a little bit of background information about the journal, that would be useful, Lorraine.
Oh, thank you, Helen, and thank you for inviting me along to today's session. I'm really pleased to be here. As you said, I'm the co-editor of Insights, along with my co-editor, Steve Sharp. And I can't remember how long Steve and I have been the co-editors of Insights, but I think it was probably around 2009 that we took over, so quite a long time. But Insights was started much before that. It began in 1988. And was then called Serials, a rather old-fashioned word, I suppose, nowadays. But the mission of the journal hasn't changed. And our mission is to connect the information community and encourage the exchange of ideas on scholarly communication. As I say, the first, from 1988, when the journal was started, to 2011 as Serials, it was a journal to begin with just in print, then print and online, available on subscription, but free to members of UKSG. Then in 2012, we became Insights, no longer Serials. People no longer knew what that meant anymore. And we became online only. But the business model at that time was still subscription free to the members. But then I'm really delighted to say that the members of the UKSG committee agreed to our plea that we could become an open access journal. open access, but not charging article processing fees or anything like that. And that was agreed, and UKSG supports the journal financially. So it's what they call a diamond journal. It's fully open access, you don't have to pay. Just one more development I will tell you about, which was another good thing that happened. Although we moved, I think by 2013, 14 into fully open access, we were still publishing issues, if you like. So we were publishing issues 3 times a year. And that really brought huge pain points for us as the editors, for our peer reviewers, and indeed for our poor authors, because there was this hard deadline of the issue. And then I think it was, again, I should have looked up the dates before, but about four years ago, we moved to continuous publication. And that has really helped so much, because continuous publication means we publish the articles as and when they're ready. It means that there is no hard deadline, which means we can be much more thorough, support the authors much better. And it also means that when articles are published, they're not one of a bunch of journals in an issue. Each one is published individually, and we never publish more than one article in a week. So we can really help to promote that article. So yeah, that's a little snapshot of our journey since 1988.
Really useful, Lorraine. And one thing which strikes me about the journal is the sheer variety of coverage. Once upon a time, it possibly had a focus on serials, but now it's really across the library spectrum. And maybe on that, can you tell us what sort of articles you do publish?
Well, yes, as you say, Helen, we've got a really wide range of articles. And we have, again, everyone here can go to the website and read all the categories, so I'm not going to go down the whole list. But broadly speaking, I would say that we have articles which are research articles, where a member of our community, a librarian, or indeed sometimes a publisher, has done research, and we publish research articles. But a very popular category that we publish are our case studies, and they really across the whole range of scholarly communication. You know, as you say, Helen, it would have once been about journals, digitization, using social media, anything you can think of really that comes up that we share as case studies. And they are really popular articles, actually, and I think people very much appreciate being able to learn from the work that others have done in the community. You know, very often they might be embarking on a similar project, so they're very, very helpful articles, and very popular articles. And then the other type of article we have, and do you remember I said part of our mission is to encourage the exchange of ideas on scholarly communication. So we also publish a category of articles which we call opinion pieces. Now, I want to make it clear, although they're opinion pieces, they have to be substantiated with some evidence. But some of those articles that we've published under that heading of opinion piece have been really influential, and we've had some great thinkers in our community writing about emerging business models, for example, and they really have been turning points sometimes, and stimulated that debate that is part of our mission. So those are the three key categories.
Could I, just going on from that, ask you, typically what length is a research article, and what length is a case study, or roughly?
Roughly, well, I would say roughly 3,000 words. But we do have some flexibility, really. And I would just point out to people that 3,000 words really comes from the old print days, when, you know, articles had to be sort of quite contained, because, you know, it just cost more because there were more pages to print if the articles were longer. Clearly, in an online only world, that isn't such a restriction. We do have longer articles. I mean, I would always say to people, you know, do be careful not to make things too long, because you might lose your audience otherwise if it's a very lengthy article. So yeah, about 3,000 words, but it can be longer. And as you say, Helen, for research articles, if you've got, you know, your literature review, your methodology, that's not a huge amount.
Yeah, so it's 3,000 words, regardless of whether it's case study or a research article.
That's our average, but yeah.
Yeah,
but
okay, no, that's very good
but
to
we're
know.
open to longer.
Yeah, and the opinion piece might also be around 3,000 words. Now, I see we have some questions in the chat box, so I'm going to go over to Heidi now, if that's okay. So Heidi, can you call out anything that's come up so far?
Yes, so Hugh Murphy has just popped into the chat there. Question for Lorraine. Does someone need to put in a query to the journal to gauge interest and tease out an idea before submission, or can you just cold submit a piece of abstract?
Oh, thank you, Hugh. Thank you for your question. No, you can just submit. But if you have some thoughts, some ideas, and you want to run them by me and Steve first, do send us an email. We're really happy to have a chat about any ideas that you might have, that you want to sound out with us, but you don't need to. You can just go ahead and submit.
Okay.
Yes, we also have one from Saoirse. So she asks, for case studies, do they require a specific structure or criteria? And is this available or listed somewhere?
The case studies don't require a specific structure, no. We haven't been we haven't been that structured, I suppose. It's a good idea if you have a case study, perhaps just to visit the journal and read a couple of the case studies that we have published. They are quite different in their structure. I mean, I mentioned, for example, one of our most popular ones has been on use of social media by the library. And that's got quite a loose structure, I suppose. Others, which have obviously, I don't know, developing systems, developing roadmaps and so on, are a little bit more structured. But it's really up to you to find the structure that works best for your case study.
Thanks for that, Lorraine. And as you say, to study the journal and the case studies in it, and I assume that is I have a question here, like what's the first piece of advice you would give to somebody considering submitting to Insights? Is it to look at the journal or is it something else?
Well, I would say this advice really applies across the whole board of journals. Yeah. But obviously I'm talking from the Insights point of view here. I think the first thing is really have a look at our scope that's on the website, and that tells you the type of articles we're interested in. And I was thinking before we started today about those articles that we haven't accepted, and usually the reason we don't accept an article is because it's not within our scope. So that's the first thing, just check that you fit our scope. And you know, if it doesn't, it probably means there's a journal somewhere else that is more suited to your particular thing. And yes, read a couple of other articles. I think that's, again, whether it's Insights or another journal you're planning to submit to, always a good idea. Find some other articles similar to the area that you're going to be writing in, and have a look and see how they've done it.
Sorry, Heidi, that question followed on naturally from something that had come up, but I think you might have had another question, had you, in the chat box?
We do, one in from Fiona Morley, and she asks, does my work have to be original? For example, if I published a blog post using data on an aspect of library operations, can I use the same data and case study for Insights?
That's a really great question, Fiona. Very often we are publishing articles that were first published as blog posts. And indeed, sometimes Steve and I have read blog posts, and we have contacted the author and they said, you know, that's really interesting. Would you like to rewrite it as an article for Insights? So if you do have some blog posts that you think will be suitable as articles, you know, my advice is don't just lift the blog post and submit that. First of all, because an article gives you an opportunity to expand. You know, usually when you're writing blog posts, you're writing in a particular style and you're trying to keep them really quite short and snappy. So you can expand in an article. You can use the same data, but you will need to rework your blog post. And bear in mind that when articles are submitted to Insights or to any other reputable journal, they are run against the plagiarism detection services. So if you have just lifted your blog post word for word, it will fail on that first check because it will say, you know, this has already been published. So yeah, definitely take your blog posts, work them up and submit them as articles.
Great. I'll go on now, but as I say, people continue writing the questions in the chat box and we'll come back to that. One of the things which I'm particularly interested in, and really my question here is, do all articles have to have literature reviews? Because this can vary greatly from journal to journal, and sometimes they really want you to, you know, really look at the literature. And I know I've made the mistake of getting bogged down in the literature, but tell me about Insights and, you know, the case study, for example. Do you have to cite the literature?
No, you don't. I mean, I think if you are submitting a research article, we wouldn't expect a really lengthy literature review, but I think we would want to see that the research, you know, had done a literature review, was building on previous work and so on. Case studies, again, there may be something really relevant to your area of work that you want to point out, but it's not a requirement, I'm pleased to say.
Okay, that's terrific, thank you. I have one here. What are the top 3 things you look for in a submission?
Right, the top 3 things. Well, I think we go back to our mission always. So would the publication of this article connect the information community and encourage the exchange of ideas on scholarly communication? So yes, that is the first sort of thing that we look at. And we really are looking for things that will, in terms of the opinion pieces, we are looking for ideas for people who will stimulate discussion. And one of the things that really pleases us as editors is if we can see that there is a discussion going on around articles we've published. In the case of the case studies, it's a slightly different thing, and I think there is just such wonderful opportunities to share work that you've done, so that other people in other organizations can build upon that. So that is another area that we look at. You know, is this going to really be helpful to the community to see what this group has done, how they approached it? Is this good information to share? There is one other category, while you're since you asked that, which I forgot to mention. We do also have a category of articles which is called Key Insights, where we welcome articles that, how can I put it, explain new technologies relevant to our world in a really succinct way. New technologies or new initiatives sometimes, in a sort of plain English, as it were. And again, those articles can be very, very popular. And I often find myself referring back to those Key Insights articles when I'm trying to remember what exactly does that, that term mean, or what exactly does that initiative do. So yes, those are the things that we're looking for. But when we were waiting, I'll also mention, Helen, since you reminded me, sometimes we are surprised as editors, and we recently published an article about happiness, and it was based on a librarian's experience of changing into a new job, and how he really used that as an opportunity to, you know, think about those work-life balance things, and think about failing and so on. And I was a little bit, well, raising my eyebrows. I thought, oh, this is a bit unusual. But Steve said, no, I think this is brilliant. I think this is brilliant. And the peer reviewers loved it as well, as did the audience. So I must say, you know, as much as I've been saying, have a look at the scope, have a look at what we've published before, sometimes there are surprising things that come along that, you know, aren't necessarily so obvious, but prove to be really, really helpful. So I suppose, in a way, the article about happiness is a case study. It's somebody's personal case study. So yeah, lesson to me as an editor, have an open mind.
Thanks for that. And actually, I read that article, and I too was thrilled to see that being published, and people looking at their lives and their careers, and, you know, where it all fits together rather than just, it doesn't just happen. And actually, when I read it, I haven't done anything with it, if you like, but what I had planned or thought of doing is looking at what he did. He is an early career librarian at this point, and he's talking about his manifesto. I'm a late career librarian at this point, and it'd be kind of interesting to see, you know, what I relate to, or my experiences in that context. And that maybe brings on me onto the point that sometimes you can build on something somebody did before. Like, I sometimes look at something and think, oh, that's interesting, and maybe you could even you know, look at it in your own context of your own library, what you're doing with whatever it is, or even saying that you're actually going back to look at this topic and see how it's changed in 10 years or whatever. So it's another way maybe of getting ideas.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, every so often something will drive me to look back. I think, oh, I remember we published an article on that ages ago. And of course, it is always quite surprising how much we've moved on. You know, things seem to happen so slowly now, day-to-day work. But when you look back, perhaps just 5 years, my goodness, you know, things have moved so much. So absolutely, those things do move on, and it's really refreshing and interesting to get articles that reflect that and update those things.
And also, just moving on, I've noticed that certain topics in the literature generally are more popular now, or coming to the fore. And I was delighted to read Elizabeth Charles's article about decolonizing the curriculum and the library and the role in that. And decolonization is also something that, you know, is very topical here in Ireland in many aspects. Are there other topics? Well, another in Ireland at the moment is EDI, equality, diversity and inclusion. Yeah. Lorraine, are there topics that you're very actively looking for material?
Well, I would stick on those topics for a moment, because I think they're worth just talking about in a bit more detail. And I would really recommend anybody who is at our lunchtime session today, if you haven't read Elizabeth Charles's article on decolonization, I really recommend it. I learned so much, you know, really. I hadn't given that whole thing much thought. I didn't know very much about it until I read her article, and actually it's one of the most read articles we've ever published. So it just shows how really topical it is. And I think she wrote that about 4 or 5 years ago. I always get, since COVID, I can never remember how long things were. Yeah. About 4 or 5 years ago. And I contacted her recently, and I said, you know, since you wrote that article for Insights, you know, there's been so much interest and things have moved on so much. Would you be willing to perhaps return to the subject? And she said that she would, but not right now because she's really, really busy, and I think she's doing her some qualification. But that is a very, very interesting topic. And we've also published some other articles on inclusivity and so on. One from a publisher who worked on that in terms of their staff makeup, and another from a journal that it was looking at the makeup of its editorial board and realized that it wasn't very inclusive in the work that they've been doing there. So there are so many interesting things, I think, and for me anyway, they're really thought-provoking, and very often I think, oh my goodness, I wish I'd thought of that or seen that myself. So that is a really, really topical subject. I think just on another subject that we're very interested in, if I may, is what we're calling the new normal, because I think we're seeing as people are slowly moving back into the workplace, some of the things that they've adopted during the COVID period they're continuing because they prove to be, beneficial for the workforce or for the users of the library and so on. So that is another thing that we're really, really interested to hear about.
Okay, just on that, during COVID, did you get more or less submissions?
Well, this is a really good question. First of all, we had more. I think it was because perhaps people had a little bit more time because they weren't traveling, maybe, so they could finish the long promised article. So at first we had more, but now we're having a little fallow period, and we don't have as many submissions as we would like. And I think part of that is because we all haven't been out and about, and very often those articles come when we're talking to our peers and we're meeting at conferences and different events. So yeah, now COVID probably is now having a bit of a tail off effect, really, because of the lack of, we don't get out enough anymore.
Now I'll come back to Heidi. Heidi, I think the chat box has a few more questions in it, maybe. So
we have one more. So Helen Fallon would like to know, is it known if Insights is read by any related professions, or is there a specific discipline that partners with librarians produce co-authored material for Insights?
Right. Well, UKSG as an organisation is an organisation of librarians and publishers and vendors, if you like. And that's how the organisation came about in the first place, because it was about trying to connect those two groups. And we do have articles, clearly many librarians write for us, but so do publishers and vendors, and sometimes we have collaborations between those two groups, writing, sometimes projects they've done collaboratively. Increasingly as well, we get as many libraries start publishing, or university presses are reinvigorated. We get quite a lot from people working for university presses or for libraries, but as publishers. So we're quite a wide range of disciplines, really, connected to Insights.
Thanks for that. And I see my colleagues Marie and Saoirse are putting up links to the articles on happiness, and possibly it's the Elizabeth Charles one as well there. So thanks very much for doing that. Now, my colleague Laima is in the audience, and she's from the UCD School of Information Science, and I was delighted to be invited by her last year to talk to the students. And I'm just wondering, we probably have some students here who are doing the Masters in Library and Information Studies. Lorraine, a lot of people do bodies of work, whether it be projects or theses, but I think not that many of them get published. And I think it may be because it coincides with people coming out of college looking for a job, you know, doing many other things in life. What advice would you give to students on programs with regard to theses or major research projects, etc., in terms of getting them published? And I know it's not just a matter of, you know, there is work to be done to reframe them for a journal, but in terms of that, any advice?
Yeah, well, it would be great. It would be really great to have more articles from, you know, that group who are currently studying or have just finished their dissertations. We have published one or two, and there's one I'm thinking of, oh, maybe about 10 years ago, maybe somebody can find it. Stuart Lawson, actually, while he was a student, published an article in the Sites. You know, I think this is a really wonderful opportunity, because if you've been working in your dissertation, for example, and you've been pulling together all this data, sticking to the theme of the week, there are probably things that your colleagues in the wider community would love to learn about and to hear about. And Helen, you know, as you said, clearly you have to do some work. An article is a much shorter piece of work. But again, I think there may well be facets of the work that you might have done that you could see being pulled out into a standalone article. And yeah, absolutely. And just to say as well, it might be obvious, but I'm going to say, when articles are submitted to us, as the co-editors, we do know who has submitted, we would never judge an article submission on the basis of the author. We judge on the basis of the article. So we never say, oh, this person's just out of school, we don't want to hear from them. Not at all, and we don't really look at that. And of course, when it goes to the peer reviewers, it's a blind peer review. So the peer reviewers would have, well, they have no idea who wrote the article. So I know sometimes, you know, if you're starting out, it can be quite intimidating to submit. But let me assure everybody in that situation, that will not harm your chances at all, because we wouldn't even consider it.
That's thanks for that, and that is a good point. It is, you just have to do it and send off the article and not worry about, I know the first time I sent something out, I was kind of very nervous about it, but you just have to get over that. And there's something to remember too, if I can just add this, is the editors really are your friends. That's something I've noticed a lot, and now I'm on the editorial board of New Review of Academic Librarianship. It's the amount of time and effort people put in to making the article the best it possibly can be. And I found that myself submitting, as I say, to Insights, that it comes back from the peer reviewers and everything that's suggested makes the article better, actually. And it's great that there's somebody there to do this. And I usually advise people, like, when you're 80% happy with it, send it off, because you're never going to be totally happy. I think people keep on editing, and then the peer reviewers do their work, and sometimes they come back and they want more of something I hadn't thought of, and they want less of something that I thought was terrific. So I have to cut something maybe that I hadn't even thought of cutting, you know. So yeah, letting the peer reviewers
yeah. And I would say to anyone who's thinking of submitting an article for the first time, it can be quite a scary thought, having these peer reviewers, you know, pouring through your article and having their feedback. But I would say they are fantastic. You know, they give their time, and some of the peer reviews are so detailed, and they really, as you say, Helen, they're doing everything they can to help you make your article better and more robust. So again, if you are thinking of submitting for the first time, you know, don't be dismayed if you open the email and there's loads and loads of comments from the peer reviewer. I mean, they wouldn't bother if they didn't think the article was worthy, they would have just said reject the article. So they're really working with you to help you strengthen your article.
Thanks, Lorraine. Lorraine, I have a question. Maybe you'll quickly go through the process from submission to publication, just so that people understand what's involved.
Yeah, I will do. So when you first submit an article to Insights, that's me and Steve, the co-editors, will have what they call a sort of desk review of that article. And we, as I say, we're not looking at who wrote it, we're looking at the article. We're really checking it fits within the, the scope of our journal, and also it supports our mission, as I said. So we will do that first, sort of fairly cursory, I would say, in some ways, look at the article, and then we will find the peer reviewers to review it. So the reviewer will be asked if they will review, and they have to accept. Sometimes, of course, the peer reviewers are excellent, they're so knowledgeable. Sometimes, unfortunately, they're busy, so we can't always necessarily get the first one, but they do really try to help us. They will do their review, and then there are various sort of, I think, sort of 3 categories, I suppose, that the reviewers will decide. One is to reject the article, if they just think it's not right, if we co-editors have made a mistake, it's not in scope or whatever, they will suggest that we reject it. But that very rarely happens, I hasten to add. The second category, which also very rarely happens, is yes, publish it without any further work, it's just perfect. So that very rarely happens either. And the third, most common, is yes, we should publish this article, but it needs some attention, and then they will provide the really detailed feedback for the author so that the author can then make those changes. Then there's another process where we really check that the author has, addressed those issues that the peer reviewer raised. Very occasionally, it might go back for further peer review, but that's not usual, but it does happen on some occasions. And then it goes through a process of editing. So that's quite different from peer review. That's the sort of language, picking up all the typos, making sure the dreaded citations are in the right style and so on. And we're really lucky at Insights. We have Elaine, who is our editorial assistant, and she does a wonderful job in reviewing those articles editorially. And again, she'll work with the author if there are things that need to be discussed. And then we're away, really, once that's done, and it goes off to the production people who create the HTML and the PDF version. And then finally, ta-da, it's publication day, and we publish the article and we try and promote the article and work with the author to promote the article. And again, sometimes if there are events going on, maybe the author is going to be speaking at a conference or something like that, that's another opportunity to promote the article.
Great. And that process, when it leaves my desk until it appears in print, could you give an idea of the number of months, for example?
I would say on average it is about 3 months.
3 months. Okay.
I would say on average. Sometimes that's sometimes that, depending on the amount of work the peer reviewer requires. Also, because UKSG supports Insights, we have a limited number of articles per year that we can afford to publish. So it may be, if your article was ready in December, but we'd run out of, our allocation, we'd have to wait and make it the first article in January. So it can be a few things like that. So I would say an average of 3 months.
Great. Now I'll call on Heidi to see if there are any more questions in the chat box.
We have no more questions. Hugh just posted up Stuart's article there, a link to that for people to look at. And then if anyone else has any questions, please do pop that in. But that's it for now, Helen.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're ready to wind up shortly, so I might even suggest if you want to unmute, you could put up your hand, but I'm not sure that I can see everybody. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box, or you can just unmute. And if you're going to ask a question, will you just identify yourself? I think if there's no questions, we might wrap up. I had a few things listed myself. Just maybe one final one. I think I know the answer to this one, but is it okay to write in the first person? People sometimes worry about things like that.
It is, and it's increasingly common that people write in the first person. You know, years ago it used to be rather frowned upon, and I think, you know, certainly on some of the case studies, it can be you know, much friendlier, much nicer way of writing. Or if you're writing about happiness, for example, doing that in the third person might be rather peculiar. So yes, I think it's horses for courses. So think about you know, your type of article and pick the appropriate style.
Great. Okay, if there's no further questions, then we'll wrap up now. And I really want to, well, I want to thank Lorraine especially, but also I'd like to thank Heidi Campbell, Elaine Bean and Fiona Morley Clark for their work on today's session. Indeed, for all of our Love Data Week, it's been a tremendous success. So thanks to all the people involved. And thank you all very much for giving up your lunch hour to come to what was an excellent session with Lorraine. Thanks so much for that. I think, Lorraine, we can have puns that it's given us great insight, etc. But you can expect a lot of Irish submissions now.
Good, good. I'm looking forward to them.
Okay, thanks everybody, and enjoy the rest of the day.